This first episode is from a Facebook Live event. All other episodes will be about 15 minutes, so feel free to pause and come back if you need to. So feel free to jump in with anything if you have any questions as I go through anything. I think this will also save and people can address this and review it later for your own education purposes. But, your contract is your contract, and your contract basically outlines, who's responsible for what, and who's going to pay what and when, but then there are the terms of the contract, which is a vital part that there's a lot of people out there that provide different terms, or they try to bring the terms that are in their day-to-day contract over to the terms, their large loss and or time and material contract. And that just doesn't work. So, the thing that you really got to take notice of is it needs to really fall into the space of the contract. So a time and material contract needs to basically have your actual contract. It needs to have your terms and conditions. I like to also have a definition section, which also defines any terms that are in your rate sheet that is also going to be part of the contract, and also defines any terms maybe a little more detailed that are inside of the contract or the terms and conditions section. I think it's very vital. I know some of our T&M contracts, I've seen some that are 45 pages, that's including the rate sheets. Definitely want to try to reduce it down. And I also think it's very important to make sure that every single page, especially when you get into the rate sheet and the terms and conditions and things like that, if a page doesn't have a signature panel on it for the client, then it definitely needs to have an initial section on it. The terms and conditions that we're going to cover here today and some other topics, I will send to anyone. Just direct message me with your email and I will send you a copy. They are samples. I am not an attorney, so let's go ahead and get that out of the way. But I have been doing large loss and time and material for about 18 years. And so I've just now moved over to this side of the world because I've been working with Helix Code to basically solve a lot of my problems in the field, and we're almost there. I'd say that we are definitely the most technological advanced software for time and material that's available in the market today. It is very transparent, as much as or as little as you want it to be. But the biggest thing is that it holds you accountable and holds your staff accountable to make sure that they're actually doing what they're supposed to do every day without having to babysit them. We're going to go through the terms and conditions. They're not in any specific order, and I'm going to just give you a summary of what each area means. But if you want me to dig into more detail, just post a comment and I will get right to it. So the first thing I have in my terms and conditions is modifications and change orders. This section basically walks everyone through, process. You're basically going to be providing, especially with a large loss or a time and material project, it's good to have a good scope of work that's included in your ROM. Your ROM, and for any of you that may be new, is a rough order of magnitude. It's going to include a scope of work or what you plan on doing. And, what a lot of people in the industry used to call is a not to exceed, but it's not a not to exceed. The reason we use a rough order of magnitude is because if something falls outside of what you wrote there or something comes up unforeseen, then you can always come back and do a change order. So this section also addresses that. And it protects both sides, with basically stating that, all change orders and modifications must be in writing and approved by both parties, so on and so forth. Very easy, very simple. It's usually a fairly short section, and I'm an attorney, and laws are different in each state. And I recommend that you guys that travel a lot have an attorney that's pretty familiar with all the states that you plan to travel in. If not, it may be good to go with a higher level attorney. Not that I'm here to endorse Ed Cross, but I've worked with a company prior to coming here that's hired him before a few times, and he has people in almost every state, or that covers each state. Someone like that will be great. The next section I've added, especially as technology has grown a lot, is a digital documentation and signature statement inside of my terms and conditions. Basically, this sets the standard because your contract is with your client. Your contract is not with the adjuster. It's not with the consultant or the insurance underwriters. It is with your client. And so basically this statement states that you may submit some paper items, but you're also going to be submitting everything in digital formats such as photos, geolocation, clock ins and clock outs, e-signatures, digital logs, so on and so forth. That way, this covers you. Most people out there have been inching towards this for a long time. We just kind of put everything in one single environment, from your photos to your notes, to your job diary notes, your daily project manager summary reports, your clock in, clock out. It's all. There's still a few things that we are going to be adding to take away eventually any paperwork. That's probably going to take another 6 to 8 months in development. We do have our own development team, but that does help. The next statement is early pay discounts. So now, this one is particular per the state that you're working in. Some states allow this. Some states, like Florida, has some specific guidelines that if you have a deal with your roofer, for example, and if you pay him within 20 days, then you get an extra 5% discount. Obviously, a lot of contractors do this to help improve their margins. So you're going to get their invoice, you're going to add 20% to it, but you're going to pay them quickly so that you get a quick pay discount. So this statement basically states that a provider can negotiate early pay discount savings and does not follow to the client. Now, in some states, you have to give the client the opportunity to pay that as well. So make sure you're getting with your attorneys on this statement here. This statement is a good one because if you end up and you don't have this statement, I've seen contractors have to come back and give that 5 or that 10% discount back to the client at the end of the job. I do know people, I'm not going to say their names, that have won this every time they've gone to court, one of them especially in Florida. And basically, he has in his contract that if you want to take advantage of these, then the contract must be paid in full within the same time period. So if you're getting a 20-day or a 30-day or quick pay discount with your subcontractors, then you basically have in your contract that in order for the client to receive that same discount, then they must pay the contracted amount within those same days. And to me, that's fair. If you have a quick pay discount of 10% from someone and your contract has been paid by the client in full within 10 days, which we all know, especially in our large loss world, that's very rare. But I have seen it done with some of our better to do clients in the world, then that is definitely a way to go. Another one, and this is where I'm going to actually pull up my chat bot to kind of give you guys an example, is labor terms. So, this is our standard work week is what's going to be mentioned here. And then however you want to set your overtime. Some guys want to do overtime after 8 hours a day. Some guys want to do overtime or premium rate charges, after 5 p.m. Some guys want to do it on weekends and holidays. Whatever the case may be, this is your company, it's your business. But the way to look at it, in my opinion, the most popular one I've been seeing lately is you have prime working hours and you have premium working hours. Basically, premium working hours is like after 5 p.m. Prime working hours or standard working hours is from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. or 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. Whenever you typically do your morning lineup until 5 p.m. That's the most common one I've seen. And then anything after 5 p.m. is at a multiplier of 1.33 to 1.5, depending on who the contractor states. Case law of 24/7 Restoration Specialist LLC versus Young and Associates 2023. Basically says that courts have upheld that insurers must pay based on actual reasonable charges, not consultant imposed reduction. But at the end of the day, if any of you are part of RIA, which I highly recommend, I also highly recommend you guys read Ed Cross's books. I've learned a lot from his stuff over the years. Basically, consultants have no legal bearing whatsoever on your contract. Now, the flip side of that is if you're a total jerk to them, which I have been in a lot of times, but there's a cost to winning all the time. And that's a lesson that you sometimes have to learn the hard way. Is like you can win, but you're going to end up in court every time if you want to win on every issue every day. So there's sometimes a compromise. Or you got to be a little reasonable or willing to give because they do have an influence on the adjuster. The adjuster relies on these consultants to determine that your bill audited. That you don't have double billing, you don't have things in there you shouldn't have, you don't have things in there that you can't validate. But then, as we all know, there are some bad players out there that their whole goal is to cut your bill by 20 to 30%. It depends on how much you want to stand behind it. I know some contractors that negotiate and give in way too easy, and then that affects all other contractors. Most of them stay in and fight the good fight. But I will tell you, I would always fight the good fight until I felt like I got where I needed to be. And then you never give in on any specific issue. You always write out or have your attorney write out a statement basically saying that you are conceding under duress or negotiation or agreeing to negotiations under duress. And do not list that you're negotiating on your labor rate or your dehumidifiers or whatever the case may be, because then that will be used against you again. So if you give in on this job, you say, okay, I reduced my labor rate to X number of dollars, you might as well go ahead and change your rate sheet. Because if you end up with that same adjuster again, I guarantee you he's going to say, Last year on this project, you only charged me $25 an hour. Now you're trying to get me 28. Well, 28 is what's in my contract. Yeah, but now we got a history here, and they're going to argue that with you. So the best thing to do is document, which we all know, and have a good solid contract. The next thing in my terms and conditions is the per diem lodging and travel. Now, this one is all over the place based on which contractor and what they do. Some contractors have their own bunk houses, and so they have a flat set rate. I have some that try to get the GSA rate. I always like the GSA just because it makes things somewhat defensible, even though GSA has nothing to do with, your contracted rates with your people. But if you use it as a reference of guidelines in your contract, then it's pretty clear. Because then you'll have adjusters and consultants come at you and say, oh, we're not paying GSA per person. We expect 2 guys to be in a room if they're below a supervisory level. We've all heard those arguments. And the reality is that, the GSA is per person per day, and specifies some of the things that these consultants try to tell me that the water is included, which it is not. I always have to break out the OSHA standards. You'll find some consultants that somewhat understand our IICRC standards, but most of them have no clue of the gypsum standards or the OSHA standards or any other standards that govern what we do day in and day out as contractors. FEMA also recognizes per diem and lodging and travel. FEMA also recognizes lay down yards and mobilization. And there's a lot of misconceptions on what the FEMA law is out there. In fact, signatures. There are people on our side for years, and I don't want to name any names, that have been telling everybody that FEMA does not accept digital signatures. They will only accept paper logs. Well, by law, that is incorrect statement. I actually have a white paper that I've written on this that cites the law. It's been in place for over 10 years, and it's the Federal e-Sign Act. And if you guys want that, let me know. So what it is, though, is you get these FEMA adjusters out there. They may preference one way or another, but at the end of the day, they have their own playbook, and that's with any adjusting firm. But they typically do not understand the actual policy, which is the contract between your client and the insurance company. And same thing with FEMA. These FEMA adjusters do not understand the law, and they do not know the law. And so the law is on your side. Digital signatures, digital documentation is all accepted. Okay? So don't let anyone tell you otherwise to try to keep you trapped in their software that doesn't provide that. But make sure that when you do your per diem lodging and travel, that you document how you're going to handle this very clearly. I've seen some contractors put in there that their per diem does not and will not prevent them from also providing meals at cost plus on their markup. I've got some that will basically spell out that, this is a flat rate per day per person, and we provide, and they spell it all out. We provide bunk houses and all this kind of stuff. And then you got some that will even say that, we may provide meals in lieu of paying this to our workers as far as the per diem goes. There are all kinds of different profit centers within any kind of job. And so a lot of contractors, use this section to actually make a little extra money sometimes. So they may say that they're paying $50 to $65 a day, in per diems. And I've had one consultant about 2 years ago come to me and say, well, we want your per diem logs. And I'm like, per diem log? What is that? And he's like, well, we required that a log every time you handed out this money to these workers. And I'm like, well, good luck to you. And he's like, no, we need that or we're not going to approve it. And I'm like, okay, well, I will see you in court because that has no legal bearing. It's not in my contract. I did not gather it. And he's like, well, go create it. And so there they are trying to get me to go forward some information, after the fact, which is stupid. And there's no way I recommend anyone ever do that. If you're going to gather any information, you do it real time and do it according to your contract and to the T. Do not let people sucker you into going back and recreating something after the fact because you're opening yourself up for fraud at that point. So don't do it. Next section is temporary labor. This one here is pretty simple. It basically states that you're going to be billing per your attached schedule and not and that way you're eliminating the cost plus, because that's the other tactic consultants try to do is like, well, I want to see your invoices from your labor companies. No, you're not entitled to that. As a matter of fact, you're not legally entitled as a contractor to give a single thing to a consultant unless you're signed that into your contract or an agreement with your client, or maybe you're part of a managed repair program that gave you this project that you've agreed to certain terms. Most of my guys that have worked with me over the years will tell you, I won't give them a thing. If they want how many people or how much equipment, they feel glad to go around and count it themselves, but I'm not giving you any paperwork that's unaudited. You can play as nice or as hardball as you want. I recommend that you do not cave into pressure and only turn in things that you know are audited and 100% accurate, because if you come back and find that one of your guys let the generator off, they're going to try to hold that against you. Okay. Do not turn any paperwork over until it's been audited by your staff. Hopefully you got a good team of admin and you're going to basically be auditing everything every day. But that's tough to do, as we all know, that's actually been out there doing $1 million projects or $20 million projects or $50 million projects. And you're scrambling with 500 people on the ground to actually audit that amount of paperwork every single day and to make sure that you've gone through your photos and captured everything. It's tough. So on to the next one. Subcontractors, third-party equipment. Basically, this states that you're going to be billing per your rate sheet, okay? And a lot of people have a statement in there that says some items may not be available or may not be on my rate sheet, in which case then I'll supply that at markup, but it's solely your, as the contractor's discretion. And so again, this is where consultants try to play games with you and tell you that they want to see your Sunbelt or Herc invoice or whoever they saw out there's label on your equipment. And basically your pushback to that is courts have shown it does not matter if the piece of equipment was donated. It did not diminish the value that the client received. And so you're due what is on your rate sheet. Do not give in to these tactics, guys. If you want to get paid what's fair and to make a decent margin and to make a living in this industry, most of the new T&M stuff out there, like our program, if you utilize it correctly, will not allow duplications. It will tell you that this person's already clocked in. They cannot be clocked in again, so on and so forth. But if you're using some older antiquated software, which a lot of my friends still are, because it's expensive to change softwares, do not give in to these tactics, okay? Do not play their games. I also try to prevent people from even entering my work zone, including adjusters. I can't tell you over the years how many adjusters and consultants I have stopped from entering our work zone because they didn't have on the proper PPE. And they'll be like, well, we're allowed to be in here by the client. I'm like, okay, that's all great. Come over here and sign in on my sheet in case you get electrocuted or something falls on your head while you're in there. And we're going to issue you and charge you for hard hats, safety vests, and safety glasses, so on and so forth. And you better go put some boots on because those tennis shoes ain't going to work. Once you get that resolved, then. And so I've had consultants and adjusters leave and come back after running to Walmart and buying what they need to walk in my job site. So, and, you've got to control that job site, and by managing someone else's staff, man, you're just, to me, you're just opening yourself up for liability. I just don't like it. Material, consumables, and vendors. So basically this section is anything that is not in your rate sheet and your price list, you're going to be doing it at cost plus your markup. Some contractors will be putting cost plus 20%. Well, we all know that's truly only a 16% margin, so a lot of contractors have beefed that up. A lot of contractors I know now are trying to do cost plus 30% markup. Whatever it takes for you and your business, I cannot tell you what to charge, but, it is good practice to make sure that you're getting a decent margin so you can make a living. There's no way that 16% covers overhead and profit for any company that I know out there that's in this industry. So I'll leave that right there. Equipment terms and rates. So if you're going to provide any equipment terms, I highly recommend this. There are still a few contractors out there that do not, and there are arguments that can be made that during a hurricane or a freeze event, whatever the case may be, and nobody can get equipment, that you will win this argument. But if it's just a one-off large loss, you will lose this. I can almost guarantee that, even though I'm not an attorney, not trying to say I'm an attorney. But your equipment terms and rates, if you're going to do it, you better spell it out in here. Because if you don't spell it out, then the consultants are going to try to come back with some of this new stuff I've been hearing of, 7 for 4 instead of the 7 for 5. And then a lot of contractors I find make the mistake of doing 30 for 21. But if you go to Sunbelt, it's actually 28. It's actually a calendar week, not a calendar month. And so the discount is 28 days for the price of 21. So don't give them those 2 extra days for free, just unless you're being the kindness of your heart. But I will tell you, I've been on projects. Those 2 days would have been $1 million worth of equipment. Okay. So be careful how this section is worded in your contract, in your terms and conditions section. Same thing, fuel, under the equipment sections here. I also talk about the fact that if I have generators that are running equipment or powering up things, that we fuel minimum twice a day. At the end of the day, the last thing, especially with the newer generators, that you want to happen is you don't want them to shut down. Because if they shut down, they got to be reprimed. You end up having issues with getting the computer reset. It is a pain if your guys do not know what they're doing with these generators. Old school generators, a lot easier to crank right back up. But you still end up getting trash in your filters, and now your maintenance becomes an issue. Also in this section, I tend to also reinstate what I also have in my rate sheet, which is the 240-hour generator maintenance fee. Your generators are running 24 hours a day, so that's every 10 days. Most generators actually have that recommendation in the handbook that comes with your generator, telling you basically that you need to, go through and change the filter, your fuel filter, the oil filter, check your battery, do any other kind of fuel treatments or cleanings, whatever the case may be. I'm not a mechanic, not trying to act like I'm a mechanic, but I know that our rates usually for that, we go between $400 and $600 for that service. And I would recommend that your guys keep a ticket of that service that they did. Even if they're clocked in as a mechanic on your rate sheet, I still recommend that they keep like a service ticket stating exactly what they did to that generator and what day is your backup. And we can get into backup and documentation in another one. Storage and delivery, basically this is, if you're going to be storing things, freight delivery, mobilization costs, you may have moved two of your own tractor trailers, but now you use a third-party company to transport those. You're going to be basically charging that at cost plus your markup. Pretty simple. Taxes, permits, and fees, same thing. Another good one, though, as we all found out last year when we got all the way down there on Helene, and then next thing you know, we had to pack everything up and demobilize for Milton, is that you have standby charges. So if you've had to stop work or wait to start work because of the client's got an issue, or they're saying, oh, hold on, we've already signed this contract, you've gotten started, but now we need you to wait until these engineers come in here, or we need you to take this weekend off because, we got some other work that's being done. Well, you need to have standby charges spelt out in your contract. This explains that you're going to be charging a minimum of X number of hours a day for those guys while they stand around, plus the per diem and their lodging. And that basically protects your readiness cost. I mean, you have got to have all of these things in here, because if you don't, you're not protected. Your terms and conditions is one of the most important parts of your agreement for your T&M contract. Ordered specialty equipment, again, this one's pretty simple, falls back into the other categories of, anything that you did not have on your rate sheet, is going to be at cost plus your markup. Assets damaged by the client or their staff. I can't tell you how many times that we've agreed to allow, once we start getting pretty good ways into a project, to let their own maintenance staff come in and start doing some of the things that they've got to do, or their cleaning staff to do some of the cleanup that they may want to do to kind of get ready to open up. Because any of us that do commercial work, we know that the goal is to get these people back in business as fast as possible. They're losing, $200,000, $1 million a day, whatever the case may be, based on the company, and they're going to be wanting to get open. But if their guys choke out your air scrubber by laying a piece of sheetrock on top of it, or a trash bag or whatever, and burn up your machine, you need to have a statement in there saying that you're going to hold them liable. Tariff and market volatility. This is a big one right now, obviously, as we are now moved into the time of tariffs, and prices on lumber and cabinets are fluctuating daily. Definitely, especially if you have any of these items in your rate sheet, or you've provided a quote for recon, you definitely want to make sure you have a tariff statement in there, and in market volatility, that you have the options to kind of come back and do cost plus if it's an item that you had in your rate sheet. It just further protects you. This statement I have is one that I've added to my list. This probably in the last 6 or 8 months. It's a pretty good statement, but your attorney can probably help clean that up. Billing caps. A lot of guys like to go ahead and outline what items are eligible for billing caps. This is a place where you definitely want to kind of spill that out and make sure. I have some contractors actually state in there that anything that the client feels like should be a billing caps issue, such as trash cans or 5-gallon buckets, that those items need to be brought to your attention as the contractor within 7 or 10 days of start. So there's a lot of different ways you can do that section. documentation of charges. This basically lines out what all you're going to provide at the end. I really like this section because this is what reinforces what you already have in the body of your actual contract section. Here in the terms and conditions, you're talking about that you're going to provide XYZ items. You're going to provide your crew sheets or a clock in, clock out log. You're going to provide an equipment and consumable daily reporting and photos, along with an invoice, whatever the case may be for you and your business. That's where all this is spelled out and is very clear. And so that way, when the consultants or anyone else comes back and tries to push out, or they show up on day 5 and they send you that nice little email that tells you all the things that they expect to receive every single day. Now, you can pretty much go down, tell them to pound sand that your contract states what you'll provide. And as a side note, not consulting here, but I will tell you guys, I do know contractors that have been sued by their client because they provided information to consultants and adjusters without their consent. I will tell you right now that when I have been asked by a client to help out and be friendly with the consultants or an adjusters, even when I felt like I had good players on site, good consulting firms, because there are some good ones, I still told them that A, I will send everything to them and they can provide it, or B, I need an authorization in writing, giving me permission to turn these things over. It just protects you. I'm just telling you, it's not worth it to be giving that stuff over. And then sometimes I would just tell them, like, no, I'm not giving them all the things that they're asking for because that's not in our contract. I do not keep up with that. I do not have to provide that, so on and so forth. And just be firm. Your client, if you have built a good rapport with your client and educated them on the front end with a playbook that is coming their way when the consultants and adjusters show up, they will have faith in you and understand, especially if you've done everything that you said you were going to do, which we all should do. Under promise, over deliver. Mobilization, demobilization, portal to portal. All right, so this section has really gotten heated. I've redone this one almost every year in my career, and I've redone this one again this year, getting ready for this. But basically, this states that you're going to travel and you're going to charge for mobilization, even if you did not have a contract yet, because of the cost and the demand of this event. So a lot of contractors, I think, and I highly recommend that you maybe have one of these for it's just a one-off large loss type of situation, and then a separate terms and conditions when it comes to catastrophic events, whether it's a freeze event or a flood event or a hurricane, whatever the case may be. And courts have upheld this. If you guys want to know, I will get you in a separate note. I will get you the case law for this, but it is definitely mobilization prior to a contract is reimbursable in some cases, because that's the game that they try to play to, is they'll try to come back to you and they'll try to say, well, these rates and these transportation rates and these labor rates are prior to the date of the contract, when we do not recognize it, I think is some of the terminology, or we're going to hold this for discussion, as the consultants will say. Well, you just say, well, there is no discussion. I'll see you in a court of law because my contract is clear. And I feel very confident from previous case law that we will win. You don't have to be a jerk, even though I've been called that from time to time, but you do not have to be a jerk. You do have to stand your ground and be confident. And when you show that you know what you're talking about, you're familiar with case laws, you understand what's, normal in the industry and what your contract states that you must and must not do, it is very, very good for you. After hours premium charges, here it is again. Like I said, this terms and conditions I'm reading through here. Some people put that all into their labor section. Some people separate it out as far as an after-hour premium section to a different one. So I have it both ways inside of my group that I have right now that I provide to anyone. Additional economic terms I like to have in there. Anything that's weird, like rate modifiers, list your national holidays, travel to job sites. If your guys like during Ian and Michael and anything like that, most of my guys were driving 2 to 3 hours each way a day. You better have something in your contract to cover that, because you're going to be paying those workers, especially your labor company and your employees. Everybody's going to be getting paid. Another thing, really, while we're on the topic of pay, if you have anyone that's salaried, I highly recommend as a company, if you travel a lot or do a lot of catastrophic work in large projects, that you reanalyze how you pay them. You may want to take their salary and break it down into an hourly. I've worked at companies where they did it in segments. It was a daily segment to make up that salary. Because if you do any government work on large law stuff, and then also in a court of law, it's going to be hard sometimes when you get in there and start having to do some serious negotiations for salaried people to get paid. If their salary is over $65,000 a year, and that number fluctuates a little bit each year, so don't hold me to that, that they will not pay overtime until they get like 70 hours or whatever the case may be. Also, in this section, you definitely want to spell out what overtime means. So, everybody, these consultants and stuff will come in, they'll say, well, I only pay overtime on beyond 40 hours on this project. Well, if you have it spelled out right here in your terms, what if you didn't get the call for this job or get this contract signed until Friday, and all of your guys have already been working all week in your day-to-day business? You're going to be paying overtime, so make sure that you have some areas in your contract, where you can have some negotiation on that. And you definitely don't want to be paying overtime for the next 3 days and only be getting paid straight time. Cat fees, is another one that you definitely got to get into. Cat fees is 5%. I will tell you that most people do not use the term mobilization fee anymore. Mobilization fee will get you beat up more. The cat fee is a billable term and has actually been upheld in multiple cases. So if you guys need some of that, let me know. But the cat fee basically needs to spell out in your terms and conditions exactly what that is for. I think the current one I have written out includes, loading the trailers. It includes our additional accounting staff to handle booking hotels, paying per diems, additional payroll, additional vendor contracts, and the additional vendor invoicing, and all these things that are back, so-called back end stuff to help cover some of that overhead. And then the pushback is going to be, oh, well, you got your O&P marked up in there. No, I do not have overhead and profit in there. I have my markup in there, because your markup, even if you allowed for 20%, 16% profit margin is not enough, to pay your bills. I'll just tell you that right now. Specialty trades, anything like that. Small tool fees. Here's another one. Small tool fees, you definitely need to explain what that 3% is. I will tell you that it is hard to get that for anyone that is a supervisory level or above, because if you have someone listed as a supervisor, they really should be supervising. They don't need to be doing the work. And so a lot of times when you get in, they do not like to pay for supervisory levels and up. I have one contractor I know of that basically has this statement in his terms and conditions that his small tools is built into his labor rate. And there's a lot of consultants that actually seem to be okay with that, and it gets through a lot better. Another thing I recommend is a lot of guys have, a description in here in the terms and conditions about daily PPE. I hate that term. The last company I was at, I changed that term about 2 years ago, me and Chris Scanlon, and we came up with daily safety equipment, and then spell out in here exactly what that means. So that's our hard hat, our safety vest, and safety glasses. And so depending on what your guys are doing, they may be doing something else. We thought about including steel toe boots, but that's something that you require your workers to purchase. So that's kind of hard to charge for that legally. But then I would get pushback on what I charged every day. And I had to explain to them, listen, I'm having to launder these things and clean them and organize them and collect them. And I keep them all year round. And so this is where some of your arguments, and I know I'm kind of getting into the consulting side of things, but there's a reason that you have the $10 aspirin at the hospital. It's all the checks and balances and things that it has to go through. Actually, I have a thing in one of my other documents that spells out exactly what goes into that, all of our rates and things like that. And so it talks about the fact that, hey, during a catastrophic event, and so you have had to purchase an inventory and track all this stuff and store it and transport it and everything else, during the year, getting prepared for these cat events that may or may not happen, that we've gambled as an industry. So make sure that you spell that out as well. And I think that's about all that I was going to cover today. Your mileage and fuel definitely needs to be in there. And any kind of equipment policies that you may have as far as like how long it's going to be there and the requirements. I know a lot of guys that put in there, because I didn't mention this earlier on the equipment terms section, that if specialty equipment is requested by the client. So in other words, you got to get a couple of 2 meg generators in there to power up the entire building so they can remain open. That you put down in there that there's going to be a 4 or a 7 day minimum, whatever you feel like you've got to have. Again, I'm not like you're a consultant or your attorney. I know a lot of contractors that have 7-day minimum in there, in which case they're going to be charging for 5. And so some of them will put down a 5-day minimum, whatever the case may be. Because I will tell you, it's happened to me. It's happened to a ton of contractors I know. You get that piece of equipment ordered, the company is showing up to deliver it to the job site, and the power comes back on when they thought they weren't going to have power for a month. And now somebody's got to pay that bill. The client's going to not want to pay that bill because they never used it. Well, crap, I had to order it. I had to rent it, and so make sure you have that spelt out in there as well. And with that, I think that's about it. I really appreciate you guys. Thank you.